Well, what I would love to do, I know you don't have any other secret hidden stories that you held out from your book. And your book is fantastic, by the way. I finally finished reading the
Thank,
whole thing.
thank you.
But for any of the listeners of this podcast who have not read the book, which I'm going to plug at the end, I would love, there are a couple of stories in there that I found particularly entertaining, and I was hoping you could perhaps recount them for us.
Sure. You have to.
The first one, and this blew my mind. I mean, I think I showed you last time we talked, but this is what your book looks like in my house. Lots and lots of post-its for questions. There was, let's see, the lab tech that accidentally cut the explosion of the Death Star.
Yeah.
You know the story I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Can you repeat that for us? That blew my mind.
Well, at the time we did Star Wars, everything was shot on film. The film that ran through the camera was sent to the lab. They would develop it, and then because it was negative, it had a negative image. They'd have to make a print. So they would marry it to print stock and then run it through a printer, and the editor would get the print, and the negative would be saved at the lab and protected because it's very delicate and sensitive. The process is the editor cuts the print, and you can be sort of relatively rough with the print. If it gets scratched, it's not the end of the world, as it would be with the negative. That would be very bad. But anyway, we work with the print, and then at the end, the work print, this artifact that we create while we're cutting the film, is used for screening, so we can look at it and make evaluations and show it to audiences and get their reaction. And it's also used as a guide to the negative cutter, because it shows the negative cutter where to cut the negative to match the edits that we've made. So without getting too deep into the details, to join the negative, you have to lose a frame, because the splices were actually physically overlapped one over the other and glued together. So in order to have that little bit of extra film to glue onto the previous shot, you had to cut in the middle of a frame. So that frame was unusable and would forevermore be unusable. Okay, that's the setup. So while we're rushing to get the film finished, I got a phone call from the negative cutter. He said, I made a little mistake. I said, what's the mistake? He said, well, the shot of the Death Star exploding, I cut short. I said, how much short did you cut it? He said, 9 feet. Now, 9 feet, 6 seconds of film, it's a lot. He said, well, what do I do? I said, well, you put it back on. He said, well, I have to lose a frame. I said, yeah, well, add a frame to the end, and that'll make up for the frame that you lost. So that's what he did. So in the original release, the Death Star explodes, and as it's expanding, all of a sudden there's a little jump, and it keeps expanding. And that little jump was the lost frame. It was only one take. The ILM had only done one take. Death Star exploded, so we had to use it. And people thought that was deliberate, but it wasn't. It was the negative cutter. I always say the negative cutter has final cut, but then I realized that it's actually the projectionist who has final cut.
Oh, that's a good point. I thought it was deliberate until I read it in your book. I just thought it was, it's exploding, and then maybe it comes across something more flammable and the explosion gets bigger all of a sudden. But nope, just
little pulse. Well, no. And then I thought George fixed it when he did the special editions. I think he put something over it. He put a ring or something that hadn't been in the original.
Yeah, all the explosions are a bit bigger.
Yeah.
That actually, I did reach out to some listeners and said, hey, if you had the opportunity to ask some questions of the editor of the first 2 Star Wars movies, what would you ask? And this actually kind of dovetails nicely into one of the questions that one of my listener wrote in, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay. He writes, this is from Sam. And he writes, "Hi, Paul. This might be a basic question, but in A New Hope, to be specific, Lucas always said that the tech was not there yet at the time to show what he had envisioned. So how did you go about making him happy with all those technological restrictions in place?"
Well, we could only operate with what we had in hand. I mean, he might have been frustrated that he couldn't do everything he wanted. I mean, there was that famous scene that we cut out of Luke with Han and Jabba,
Mm-hmm.
originally played by an actor wearing a sort of a fur coat. It was an Irish actor, and he had a lot of hand gestures, "hand me boy," and I thought he was just not a good actor, and wanted to cut him out just because of that. And then, in addition to which, the information contained in that scene is a dead repeat of what Greedo had said in the cantina, so it was unnecessary, and we took it out of the original version. George told me at the time what he really wanted to do was to replace the actor with a creature, which I thought was hysterical. I thought that was the funniest thing I'd ever heard. He meant it, and obviously he redesigned Jabba for the second film. He said the reason they couldn't replace the actor with a creature was that at one point Han pokes him in the chest and his finger disappeared into the fur, and they couldn't pull a definitive matte line for the finger. So
Interesting.
that's why he didn't do it. And then, of course, when the technology caught up with what he wanted to do, he just eliminated the guy and put in Jabba as we know him.
He finally got the technology that he wanted to make all the explosions bigger and the creatures bigger. When it comes to the evolution of visual effects in cinema, few names carry as much weight as Industrial Light and Magic, or ILM. Founded in 1975 by George Lucas to help create the groundbreaking effects for Star Wars, ILM has been at the forefront of innovation in the film industry ever since. Before ILM's innovations, visual effects were often created using practical techniques like matte paintings, miniatures, and stop-motion animation. These methods required painstaking physical labor to add elements to the film, and while effective, they had their limitations. ILM revolutionized special effects with techniques like motion control photography, which allowed for complex space battle sequences that defined Star Wars. This was just the beginning. As technology advanced, ILM pushed the boundaries further, leading the charge into the digital age. In 1991, ILM stunned audiences with Terminator 2: Judgment Day, featuring the first fully computer-generated character, the liquid metal T-1000. This was a watershed moment for CGI, showcasing its potential to create lifelike, dynamic characters that could seamlessly interact with live-action elements. Just 2 years later, ILM changed the game again with Jurassic Park, bringing dinosaurs to life with a combination of animatronics and groundbreaking CGI. This film set a new standard for visual effects, demonstrating the power of CGI to create entirely believable and immersive worlds. Through their pioneering work, ILM transformed visual effects from practical, physically added elements into a new realm of digital creativity, forever altering the landscape of modern cinema. As for that scene with Jabba, in the 1997 theatrical re-release of Star Wars for the 20th anniversary, George was able to put that scene back into A New Hope, featuring a fully digital Jabba. There is another fantastic story from episode 5, or the second movie, I suppose, where you were asked to cut together a trailer. Would you share that story with us? Because that's one of my favorites from your book.
Yeah, the shooting on Empire was going very slowly, and we were over in England, and we'd been told we'd be there for 16 weeks. And we got there in March, I think. We were going to be going home in June. So after a week, Gary Kurtz, the producer, came to me. He says, "Well, it looks like it's going to be more like 2 weeks later than we planned, because things were going slowly." And after another week, he said, "Well, I think it's going to be another 2 weeks." So The more we worked, the further the ends seemed to get from us. But anyway, I say this just to point out that the shooting was going slowly. And after a couple of, maybe a month or two, maybe 2 months, Gary came to me and said, I'd like you to start thinking about a trailer for the picture. I said, well, I have hardly any footage. I mean, he said, yeah, but we need to come up with a trailer. So, the shooting went on and I started getting more stuff. And then I felt that I had gotten enough material to put together something. And so I wrote a little script and I cut together the trailer. I had experience cutting trailers early in my career. So I put this thing together and I needed a narration. And I used music from the first film and sound effects and so forth, but I needed a narration. And my concept for this was based on the origin of Star Wars, which was it was meant to evoke the serials that had played in movie theaters in the 30s, and it's sort of a retro approach to theatrical advertising. So I thought it would. I wrote it so that it would be like a. In my mind, I had imagined the announcer to be playing it like a newsboy announcing an extra edition, kind of excited, and I needed an actor. Now at this point, Mark, I wanted an American voice. So at this point, Mark Hamill's wife, Mary Lou, was 9 months pregnant, and everyone, I guess they were bugging Mark. He was walking around the set wearing a cardboard sign on his chest saying, "Don't ask."
Whatever it is.
Don't ask. The question was, has the baby come yet? Has the baby come yet?
Mm.
You say, "Don't ask." So I thought, well, I'm not going to ask Mark for this, So I go to Harrison and I say, Harrison, I need some help. They've asked me to put together a trailer, and I need an announcer. He says, you need an American, I guess. I said, yes. He says, you don't have much choice, do you? I said, no. So he resisted at first. I said, come on, we'll just take half an hour. We'll go in the studio at the end of the day. So he reluctantly agreed. And he did what I suggested. He played it like a newsboy, Luke Skywalker and Han Solo rescued the princess, defeated Darth Vader, and blew up the Death Star, but their story didn't end there. So he did it, and I mixed it together. I sent it off to George in California, and a couple of days later, I get a phone call from an assistant. He says, George loves the trailer, and he loves the announcer. Who is that? And I said, it's Harrison. He said, who? I said, Harrison Ford, one of the stars of our movie. So he said, oh, really? Okay. So I went to Harrison. I said, Harrison, we're a hit. They want us. They want us for the final version. He said, now, wait a second. This is they pay for this kind of thing. I know my father used to do voiceovers, and this is big money. How much are you getting for the trailer? I said, me, I'm not getting anything. He said, what? You're not, what? What do you mean? I said, I'm just, I get a weekly salary for being on the picture. I'm not getting anything extra for the trailer. He says, I'm going to ask for $10,000 and I'm going to give you half. So at that point, Gary Kurtz comes walking up and he says, Harrison, I wonder if we could have a little talk. He says, sure, Gary. And he puts his arm around him and they go off for a little walk, and he comes back and Harrison comes over. He says, I only had the nerve to ask for $5, but I'm going to give you. So a couple of weeks later, I got a check from him for $2,500.
What a stand-up guy.
Which was more than I think it was more than I was making a week on the picture.
Oh my gosh.
At the time, it was a lot of money. I saw him at George's 50th birthday party years later. And I reminded him of it. He totally forgot it. he hadn't remembered it at all. And I said, well, I really appreciated it. You know, I said, I'm really thrilled at how your career has turned out. He says, think how I feel.
Yeah, I guess no one would be happier about that than him, right?
He's a good guy.
By all accounts, that's what I hear as well.
Yeah.
That would tickle me as a, I'm not an actor, but I would imagine that would tickle me if someone didn't recognize I did a good enough job hiding my voice that someone who'd worked with me before is like, who is that? That was great. I go, oh, it's me. That was my voice.
Well, you told me that it's now online. People can find it if they look for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna put it up. I'm gonna put it up when I release the podcast. It's fantastic. It's exactly as you described. He sounds like a news announcer. That's exactly as advertised.
Good. George liked it.
I mean, that's the point, right?
Studio didn't like it. They replaced it with something, you know, sort of slow and ominous, the voice of God kind of announcer, you know. Where, you know.
So history seems to have remembered the original trailer.
It's funny.
That is kind of funny how that works. I have a couple more listener questions that are pretty short.
Okay.
But I have Mark who wrote to me on Instagram and said, what would you have done differently if you could revisit the first film again, knowing what you know now?
Nothing.
That's a good answer. I think it was what it needed to be.
It was, you know, 8 months of laying track in front of a locomotive. We were, you know, working under enormous pressure, many hours a day, and many days a week. We get one day off every week, and the other days we're just going full tilt boogie. You know,
Yeah.
I don't think about what I might have done differently. I mean, it doesn't I can't compute that.
I bet most fans wouldn't want you to have done anything differently anyway. So it's kind of a perfect answer, actually.
Okay, thank you.
One more question from Jesus. He asks, what was the most challenging note you received from George Lucas, if you remember?
Challenging note? No. George was up to his ears in trying to get the special effects working. And for several months, for 3 months, I was working shoulder to shoulder with Marshall Lucas and Richard Chew. And the three of us were trying to get this, get this thing on track. The first cut was really had taken us off in a wrong direction, and we had to. It's like getting an oil tanker to change direction. There's like a lot of things to change to fix it, and every cut is a conscious choice. So when I was brought in, I'm looking at this cut that George was unhappy with. What you do is you look at it and you try to identify what's wrong with it. They used to have these games in the newspaper. What's wrong with this picture? And they would show, there's a cow on the roof of the house, and there's a dog with 5 legs, and there's a car with no steering wheel or something. You look for things that are wrong, and so we're sort of playing that game, watching the cut, and saying, what's wrong with this? That went by too fast. I didn't get that. That didn't land. Or this is too slow, and the pace needs to be picked up. Or this is in the wrong place. This should have come earlier. Or that cut doesn't match. Or this bumps me. Or so you look at it over and over again, looking for things that you find to be wrong, and fix them. So every choice, every cut in the film is a choice. This frame instead of that frame. And sometimes to make the cut feel rhythmically smooth or match the action or whatever it is, sometimes I would be trimming 3 frames or 2 frames, sometimes 1 frame. And in those days, you actually physically cut the film. So I would be hanging up you never throw any film away. It all has to be cataloged and kept in case you want to, in case somebody George changes his mind and wants to go back to what he had before. So you hang these little trims on hooks in a trim bin. Walter Murch calls them smidgies or smitchies, little trims.
Mm-hmm.
And when the trim bin gets full, you call your assistant or the apprentice, and he comes in and he gives you an empty bin and takes away the other bin and puts it all where it's supposed to be and able to be found. And I had an apprentice named Michael Kitchens. He calls himself Colin now. Colin came in and looked at my bin, and he looked at it. He says, "What, did you put this film through a fan? Because of all these little bits." But
Just
yeah,
tiny little pieces.
yeah. So every one of those, every cut is a decision to cut there and not somewhere else. And what you cut to is the frame that you cut into is a decision also. So think of all the cuts in Star Wars, and think of the alternate takes there might have been that you could look for as well. So there's a lot of decisions to be made that then have to be endorsed by George. He wasn't in a position to offer challenging notes. I mean, we were all working together trying to solve the problem.
Sure.
So
That makes sense.
Marcia had been working on the end battle, and that was an enormous task. She had to work with. She had shots of the pilots sitting in wooden sets with blue screens in back of them, and she had some shots of Princess Leia and some of the rebel generals back at the command center or wherever that was. They're watching screens and so forth. And then there was some blue screen exteriors of R2 on the back of Luke's X-Wing. And, she had to build this whole battle up from nothing. If you look at the battle, you can see that the dialogue is filled with Red 3, this is Red 2, and sort of chatter that she had to put together and make sensible.
Mm-hmm.
And then for exteriors, she didn't have any of the exteriors of the ships. So what she used was World War II fighter plane footage, black and white footage.
Oh, wow.
To stand in for the exteriors. So sometimes or most of the time, the exterior shot, this black and white World War II footage, aerial footage, didn't look like anything like the shot that it was meant to be replaced by.
Mm-hmm.
In order to keep track of this all, every shot was assigned a number and sometimes a letter. So that number and letter would be physically inscribed in the first frame with a sharp tool, and to identify the shot, you would look at the first frame and it would say 435K, and then you go to a book and would go through all the shots listed in alphanumerical order, and you find 435K, and you look and you see that, oh, this is a shot of Vader's ship coming to camera, and the black and white that you're looking at might be two Japanese fighter planes going like this, have nothing to do with, it's nothing to do with coming to camera. Mm-hmm. So the action had nothing to do with what the final result was, but it just was a stand-in. She had to estimate the length of the shot because that was what ILM was basing their work on. They would look at the length of the shot. You need a 14-frame cut of Vader's ship coming to camera. And every frame is an expense for ILM, and it's not only an expense, but it takes time as well. So they would try to keep their shots as close to length as possible, and they would have handles, meaning extra frames at the beginning and end, but it would be like a 2-frame handle or something. And later on, as visual effects became more sophisticated, they would give bigger handles, but one of the rules that I've discovered over the years is that the handles tend to get used because the shots turn out better than you could have imagined. You want to hold on them longer.
Mm-hmm.
So, but on Star Wars, it was very close to the bone, and sometimes they would there would be a piece of dialogue, and they would cut the frame, cut the shot a frame short, and I'd have to send it back, and I'd say, you didn't get to the end of the line of dialogue. I need that last frame, and they'd have to do the shot over again. So there was a lot going on.
It sounds like an incredibly challenging project, that final battle.
Yeah, so while she's working on this final battle, the studio wants to eliminate it. And they're trying to save money. George had gone over budget, and they docked him 10% of his pay, I think. And he was furious about that, but that's another story. But the point was they said, look, Han and Luke rescue the princess. That's it. The movie's over. You don't need the end battle, So he was determined to have the end battle in the movie. So he tasked ILM with doing that part of the movie first, so that they couldn't cut it because it was the first stuff that, if they saved it to the end, they might have said, well, we're not going to pay for that. So
Sure.
he wanted to get that in the works first. So at a certain point, we had to deliver the cut of the end battle. So while Marcia had been working on getting the end battle on its feet, Richard and I had been recutting the rest of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
George came to me and said, look, we have to lock the end battle. So I want you to stop what you're doing and come work on the end battle with Marcia. So we took the sequence that she had cut, and we cut it in half, or I should say in two parts. I don't know if it was halves, but I think there were 3 trench runs, and Luke's was the last. And we broke it in 2. She took the first 2 trench runs. I took the last trench run, Luke's trench run, and we worked separately. And then at a certain point, we joined the 2, and we had a 3-way editing session with Marcia, George, and me that lasted, 12 hours a day for several days, where we would sit and watch the sequence. And, I would sit at the controls for a couple of hours, and George and Marcia would sit on the couch behind me, and we'd all make suggestions, and I'd do them, and then we would switch, and then Marcia would sit at the controls, and I'd sit back on the couch with George. We did this tag team editing for I think it was 2 or 3 days, and then
Wow.
we locked the sequence and sent it off. So yeah, that was, and then I went back to recutting the picture. So the 3 of us worked together for about 3 months. I was there. I got there at the end of September, beginning of October, something like that. It's October, November, December, we worked together. And at the end of December, I was expecting to go home back to New York, and they asked me to stay on and finish the picture.
Which came as a surprise to you at the time.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it. When I was approached originally, it was, can you come help out on the picture? So that's what I expected. I'd only been hired through the end of the year, and I assumed that Richard, who had been hired before me, would be asked to stay on because he was there before me.
Mm-hmm.
Marcia had gotten a call from Marty Scorsese, with whom she had worked previously on Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore and Taxi Driver. And he asked her to come. His editor died while he was cutting New York, New York. So he called Marcia and asked if she would come in and take over. And she was happy to, because she much preferred character drama to the action adventure boy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that left me as the editor for the last 5 months. And it was based on that, as it turned out, I'd been there for 8 months, which turned out to be longer than anyone else, any of the other editors on the film. So they put my name in first position. But that was their decision, and it's just based on the amount of time.
Sure. Well, that makes sense.
The process of film editing has undergone a monumental shift over the past several decades, transitioning from a linear to a non-linear approach, fundamentally changing how editors work. In the early days of filmmaking, editing was a painstaking physical process. As Paul described, editors worked with actual film strips, cutting and splicing footage together by hand on flatbed or upright editing machines. This linear method required editors to work sequentially, making it challenging to rearrange scenes or experiment with different cuts. Every change involved meticulous reassembly, making the process both time-consuming and inflexible. The advent of digital technology brought about the nonlinear editing revolution. With the introduction of digital editing systems like Avid in the late 80s and Apple's Final Cut Pro in the 90s, editors gained unprecedented flexibility and efficiency. Nonlinear editing allows editors to access any frame of a digital video clip, regardless of its position in the sequence, enabling them to cut, copy, and paste segments with ease. This method empowers editors to experiment more freely, try multiple versions of a scene, and make changes on the fly without the risk of damaging the original footage. This shift from linear to nonlinear editing has not only sped up the editing process, but also expanded the creative possibilities. Editors can now integrate visual effects, color correction, and sound design seamlessly within the same workflow, enhancing the overall storytelling experience. The ability to quickly and efficiently craft a narrative has opened up new avenues for filmmakers, allowing for more dynamic and innovative films. In essence, the transition from linear to nonlinear editing has revolutionized the industry, providing editors with powerful tools to shape stories in ways that were once unimaginable. It's a testament to how technological advancements continue to push the boundaries of what's possible in filmmaking.
I will say I think I had Billy on this podcast a few episodes back, and we were talking about our respective experiences watching the movie for the first time. And I talked about, when you're a kid, you can't quite, your sense of reality hasn't quite cemented yet. So if you're 5 and you're watching a movie with pilots, red 4 to red 2, and they're, you see their face and then you see the exterior, you see their face and then you see the exterior of the ship. It never occurred to you as a child, it would never occur to you that that's not real, that that's an actor in a wooden booth and then, a model spaceship that someone is playing with, basically. And I truly, that was one of the points of conversation I had with Billy, was really thinking that, oh, those actors are in those ships flying in space. That was just how it was.
Good.
Yeah. So it had its intended effect, at least on children that watched.
Well, I think everyone got into the spirit of it.
Oh, yeah.
The movies rely on the abandonment of disbelief. You sort of accept, you go into it. Yes, there are T-Rexes in Jurassic Park. You buy in.
You buy in, or you don't enjoy yourself. So it's much more enjoyable to buy in.
We've got to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more Tea Time on Tatooine.
Nai Shotogawa, Mbwa Kata, Iti Uwana, Wachitaki Muta, Utini Yo Patat.
Don't miss the Bunta Eve sale at the Jawa Trading Post in Mos Espa on Tatooine. We're clearing out inventory left and right to make room for all of the blown up pods from tomorrow's race. You don't want to miss this. What a find!
TD Mora, Suka.
Does that part look familiar? Well, it's not yours. You can't prove that it was stolen, painted, and that they're trying to sell it back to you. Yeah, so those were some of my favorite stories, the ones that you were able to recount. So I appreciate that very much.
Okay, good. I'd like to point out, as a point of pride, that the book was translated into French. And
Okay.
French version won an award, a literary award, in France last year. Was voted the best foreign language book on film for 2022 by the French Film Critics Association.
Congratulations. That's fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean,
My
all the other prizes I've ever won were collaborations with other filmmakers and directors and so forth, but this was an award I won on my own, so it made me very happy.
I'm sure that would be a point of pride for me as well. That's really excellent.
Thank you.
Well, I enjoyed it very much. Mom has asked for it back because she said she wants to finish it now as well. Like, well, I have to remove all of my post-it notes first, and then yes, you can have it back.
And you should definitely have your own copy.
Oh, I know. I'm actually going to get one as soon as I give it back because I want it to go on my Star Wars bookshelf with my other Star Wars books.
I'm happy to inscribe it for you.
I would love that. That would mean a lot to me, Paul.
Of course.
Well, thank you so much. Congratulations on the book. As someone who doesn't know much about editing and it does get a little into the weeds, I was really, really riveted by it. I found it fascinating.
Good.
Yeah. All right, Paul.
I tried
Well,
to
may
make...
the force be with you.
Thank you. And with
Bye.
you. Take care.
Bye.